She said we're better as friends, so I treated her exactly like one, and now she's desperate to get back what she never valued in the first place. I had been building up the courage for this conversation for weeks, rehearsing different versions in my head while I cataloged specimen samples and monitored water temperature readings in the jellyfish breeding lab. After 8 months of what I thought were meaningful moments together at the Seattle Aquarium Research Center, I finally decided to be direct about my feelings during our lunch break overlooking Puget Sound. I found Sage setting up her underwater camera equipment near the seal habitat, her dark hair catching the afternoon light as she adjusted lens settings with the precise focus that first drew me to her when she started working here as a marine conservation photographer. I had brought her favorite salmon salad from the cafeteria and suggested we eat outside where we could watch the ferries crossing the sound while discussing her latest assignment documenting the recovery patterns of local sea anemone populations affected by last year's marine heatwave. The conversation felt natural at first as we talked about optimal camera angles for capturing feeding behaviors and the challenges of underwater lighting in Puget Sound's murky waters, but I could feel my heart racing as I worked up to the real reason I had asked her to step away from her workstation. When I finally told her I had developed strong feelings over these months of working together and asked if she would consider exploring something romantic between us, she set down her sandwich and looked at me with something that felt like genuine regret mixed with surprise. She explained carefully that she valued our professional collaboration too much to risk complicating it with personal feelings, that our work relationship was too important to her career development in marine conservation photography, and that she honestly believed we functioned better as friends and colleagues who could support each other's research without romantic entanglements. I felt the disappointment settle in my chest like cold water rushing into a diving suit, but I respected her honesty and told her I understood her position completely, that I appreciated her directness rather than letting me wonder about possibilities that didn't exist. We shook hands like business partners sealing a professional agreement, and I meant it when I said I hoped we could continue working well together and that this conversation wouldn't make things awkward between us going forward. The moment I walked back into the research center and returned to my afternoon tasks of checking pH levels and documenting feeding schedules for the moon jellyfish population, I made a conscious decision to treat Sage exactly like any other colleague, which meant no more stopping by her workstation with coffee from the good cafe downtown that I knew she preferred over the break room brew, no more volunteering to help her move heavy underwater photography equipment after hours when she was setting up for early morning shoots, and no more remembering personal details like her birthday next month or her preference for the corner desk with the best natural light for editing her photos. I had been giving her special attention and priority treatment for months, staying late to discuss her projects, offering technical advice about marine behavior patterns that might improve her shots, and generally making myself available whenever she needed assistance or just wanted to talk about her work, all because I was interested in something beyond friendship. But since she wanted friendship, I would give her exactly that level of attention and nothing more. The shift was immediate and apparently noticeable because within a week, Sage was lingering near my lab station during lunch breaks, asking questions about my current research projects with an intensity that seemed forced compared to our previous easy conversations that had flowed naturally from work topics to personal interests. I answered her questions politely and thoroughly, explaining the breeding cycles of different jellyfish species and the environmental factors that affected their reproduction, the same way I would respond to any colleague seeking information about marine biology protocols or water filtration systems. But I no longer stayed late to chat about her weekend photography plans or offered unsolicited observations about composition techniques that might enhance her underwater shots. When she mentioned struggling with a particularly difficult underwater lighting setup for capturing the feeding behavior of Pacific sea nettles, I suggested she consult with Dr. Martinez in the photography lab rather than automatically offering to help troubleshoot the problem myself or volunteering to dive with her to test different camera angles. I could see the confusion in her eyes as she realized that the steady stream of small gestures and special attention she had grown accustomed to receiving from me had simply evaporated overnight, replaced by the same friendly but distant professionalism I showed everyone else on the research team, from the senior marine biologists to the volunteer docents who helped with educational programs. I redirected all the energy I had been putting into pursuing Sage into advancing my own career and research goals, which turned out to be exactly what I needed to focus on anyway. I started volunteering for overtime shifts in the jellyfish breeding program, staying late to monitor the delicate environmental conditions required for successful reproduction cycles and documenting behavioral changes that occurred during different phases of their development. When the opportunity arose for a 3-week research expedition to the San Juan Islands to study orca whale feeding patterns and their impact on local fish populations, I immediately accepted the assignment that I had previously declined because it would mean weeks away from the aquarium and less time around Sage. The expedition involved collaborating with marine biologists from the University of Washington and required advanced diving certifications that I had been putting off obtaining, so I enrolled in weekend certification courses that filled my schedule completely. When Sage approached me about our usual weekend tide pool photography sessions at Deception Pass, where I had been helping her document seasonal changes in intertidal communities, I politely explained that I was committed to intensive studying for my marine biology certification exams and preparing for the San Juan Islands expedition. I could see disappointment flash across her face when I mentioned that my weekends were now dedicated to coursework and practical diving exercises, but I maintained the same friendly tone I used with everyone else when discussing scheduling conflicts. The change in my routine meant I was interacting more frequently with other colleagues, particularly Dr. Nina Torres, a marine biologist who specialized in kelp forest ecosystems and had recently joined our research team after completing her postdoc at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Nina and I discovered we shared interests in underwater photography and conservation diving, and she was impressed by my technical knowledge of marine invertebrates when I helped her identify some unusual nudibranch species she had photographed during a recent dive near Anacortes. I also found myself collaborating more closely with Paige, our education coordinator, who was developing new interactive exhibits about Pacific Northwest marine life and needed detailed behavioral information about our jellyfish and sea anemone populations. These interactions felt natural and energizing because they were based on shared professional interests and mutual respect rather than the complicated emotional dynamics I had been navigating with Sage. I noticed that Sage had started staying later at the aquarium, often working past closing time on photography projects that could easily have been completed during regular hours, and she would time her departures to coincide with mine in what seemed like attempts to recreate our old casual conversations. However, I had established a new routine of leaving promptly at 5 o'clock to attend sea kayaking sessions with a local paddling club, followed by evening workshops on marine photography techniques at the Seattle Camera Club. When Sage tried to engage me in extended conversations about her current projects or asked for my opinion on composition choices for her portfolio, I provided brief, helpful responses before excusing myself to meet my evening commitments. The professional distance I maintained was consistent and unwavering, treating her questions and requests exactly as I would handle similar interactions with any other colleague who needed information or assistance within the scope of my job responsibilities. 3 months into our new dynamic, I could see that Sage was struggling with the reality of what friendship actually looked like when it wasn't supplemented with romantic attention and special treatment. The moment that seemed to crystallize her confusion happened during our annual staff barbecue at Golden Gardens Park, where I was having an animated conversation with Nina about her research on bull kelp forest recovery patterns following sea urchin population crashes. Nina had a way of lighting up when discussing her work that reminded me why I had been drawn to marine biology in the first place, and our conversation flowed effortlessly from technical details about algae growth rates to broader questions about ecosystem resilience and climate change adaptation. I noticed Sage watching us from across the picnic area where she was sitting alone, picking at her burger while other colleagues chatted around her, and I realized she was seeing me interact with the same enthusiasm and engagement that I used to reserve exclusively for her. When Nina laughed at something I said about the challenges of underwater data collection during winter storms, I saw Sage's expression change from curiosity to something that looked distinctly like jealousy. Over the following weeks, Sage began what seemed like a systematic campaign to test the boundaries of our friendship and see if she could reclaim some of the special attention she had grown accustomed to receiving. She started bringing me blackberry scones from Pike Place Market, claiming she happened to be in the area and remembered they were my favorite, but I accepted them with the same polite thanks I would give to any colleague who brought treats to share. When she asked if I could help her with weekend photography shoots at Deception Pass, explaining that she really valued my knowledge of marine life behavior patterns for timing her shots. I suggested she coordinate with the weekend volunteer divers who were always looking for opportunities to practice their underwater photography skills. I could see her frustration mounting as each attempt to recreate our old dynamic was met with friendly but consistent boundaries that treated her exactly like any other coworker seeking assistance. She began lingering near my workstation during lunch breaks, sharing stories about her photography projects with an intensity that felt designed to draw me into extended personal conversations, but I maintained the same level of polite interest I showed when other colleagues discussed their work. When she mentioned feeling stressed about an upcoming deadline for a marine conservation magazine submission and hinted that she could use someone to talk through her creative process, I acknowledged her concerns sympathetically and suggested she might benefit from connecting with other photographers in the Seattle area who specialized in similar work. The pattern became clear to me that she was trying to recreate the emotional intimacy we had shared before my confession, but without offering anything different than what she had already explicitly rejected. During one particularly transparent attempt to engage my attention, she mentioned missing our special connection and the way we used to understand each other so well, hinting that friendship felt somehow inadequate compared to what we had before. I reminded her gently that she had specifically requested friendship because she valued our professional relationship too much to risk complicating it with romance, and I was simply honoring her wishes by maintaining appropriate boundaries. I explained that what she was missing was likely the romantic attention I had been giving her under the assumption that we might explore something deeper, but since she had clarified that wasn't what she wanted, I had adjusted my behavior to match her stated preferences. The conversation left her looking frustrated and confused, as if she hadn't fully considered what friendship would actually look like when stripped of the romantic undertones that had characterized our previous interactions. Sage's behavior became increasingly territorial when she discovered that Nina and I had started dating, which happened naturally through our shared passion for marine conservation diving and weekend trips to explore underwater ecosystems around the Pacific Northwest. Nina had suggested we partner up for a certification course in scientific diving techniques, and our relationship developed organically from professional collaboration to genuine personal connection based on mutual interests and respect. I found myself looking forward to our conversations about everything from coral restoration projects to her experiences working in marine research stations around the world, and she appreciated my technical expertise with local marine species in ways that felt supportive rather than demanding. When Sage learned about our relationship through casual office conversation, her reaction was immediate and obvious to anyone paying attention to workplace dynamics. She began scheduling what she called urgent photography emergencies that coincidentally required my specific expertise during evenings when Nina and I had planned dates, claiming that certain jellyfish feeding behaviors could only be documented during specific tidal conditions that happened to occur when I was supposed to be off work. During staff meetings, she would monopolize my attention by asking detailed technical questions about marine life behavior patterns that were tangentially related to her current projects but required lengthy explanations that prevented me from engaging with other colleagues. She also started creating elaborate inside jokes about our shared work history, referencing obscure incidents from our 8 months of collaboration in ways that excluded Nina and other team members from conversations while emphasizing her special knowledge of my professional background. The situation escalated significantly when Nina mentioned her plans for a romantic weekend diving trip to explore the underwater caves and kelp forests around the Olympic Peninsula, which she had been researching as potential locations for her next major photography project. Sage immediately volunteered for the same weekend expedition, claiming she needed additional research material for her portfolio and that the timing was perfect for documenting seasonal changes in marine vegetation patterns. I could see Nina's discomfort with the arrangement, but Sage had framed her participation as essential professional development that couldn't be postponed, making it difficult for anyone to object without appearing to interfere with legitimate research activities. During the 3-day expedition, Sage's behavior became increasingly inappropriate as she attempted to recreate intimate moments from our pre-rejection friendship while Nina was setting up diving equipment or preparing camp meals. She suggested we share her cold-weather sleeping bag during the chilly Olympic Peninsula nights, claiming it was more practical for warmth conservation, and she asked me to check her diving equipment with unnecessary physical contact, running her hands along mine while I inspected her regulator connections and weight belt adjustments. When Nina was busy documenting underwater formations with her camera system, Sage would corner me for private conversations about our good times working together, reminiscing about late nights in the lab and weekend tide pool explorations while maintaining intense eye contact that felt designed to exclude Nina from our shared history. She also began offering to help with tasks that Nina was perfectly capable of handling herself, inserting herself into our collaborative diving preparations in ways that disrupted the natural rhythm Nina and I had developed as research partners. The most uncomfortable moment occurred when Sage suggested that she and I dive together to explore a particularly challenging underwater cave system, claiming that our familiarity with each other's diving techniques made us the ideal partnership for navigating the complex rock formations, while recommending that Nina focus on documenting the less technically demanding shallow water ecosystems. I could see Nina struggling to maintain her professional composure while dealing with Sage's increasingly possessive behavior, and I made sure to maintain clear boundaries by insisting that all diving activities follow standard safety protocols with predetermined buddy assignments that rotated fairly among all 3 team members. The situation reached its breaking point 2 weeks after we returned from the Olympic Peninsula expedition, when Sage confronted me directly about the feelings she claimed to have developed since our friendship conversation 6 months earlier. She approached me after hours when most of the research staff had gone home, finding me in the jellyfish lab where I was conducting routine water quality tests and documenting feeding patterns for our breeding program documentation. She explained that watching me with Nina had made her realize she had made a terrible mistake in rejecting my romantic interest, that she now understood what she had been missing, and that she wanted to explore the possibility of dating if I was willing to reconsider our relationship. I listened to her complete explanation before responding gently but firmly that I had moved on emotionally and was genuinely happy with Nina, that our current friendship was working well within the boundaries she had originally established, and that reopening romantic possibilities would be unfair to everyone involved, including herself. I could see the desperation in her expression as she processed my response, and she began arguing that our connection was special and unique in ways that my relationship with Nina couldn't match, citing our months of collaboration and shared professional interests as evidence that we belonged together. When reasonable conversation failed to change my position, Sage's behavior became increasingly erratic and concerning in ways that affected the entire research team's working environment. Her most serious mistake occurred during Nina's major underwater photography project documenting the recovery progress of a coral restoration site that had been damaged during a severe storm 2 years earlier and was showing promising signs of natural regeneration. Nina had been meticulously photographing the same coral formations every 2 weeks for 4 months, creating a time-lapse documentation that would be featured in a national marine conservation magazine and potentially used to secure additional funding for similar restoration projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. The project required precise positioning and consistent lighting conditions to maintain scientific accuracy across all photographs, and Nina had invested countless hours perfecting her technique to capture subtle changes in coral growth patterns and fish population recovery. During what should have been a routine documentation session, Sage volunteered to assist with equipment setup and underwater navigation, claiming she wanted to learn more about scientific photography techniques for her own professional development. However, security footage from the underwater monitoring system later revealed that Sage had deliberately disturbed the coral restoration site by repositioning several key formations and stirring up sediment clouds that obscured Nina's carefully planned shots, effectively destroying months of meticulous documentation work. When Nina discovered that her photographs showed significant unexplained changes in the coral arrangements that made her previous documentation scientifically invalid, she requested a review of the underwater security footage to understand what had caused the disturbance. The investigation revealed clear evidence of Sage's intentional sabotage, showing her waiting until Nina was occupied with camera adjustments before systematically disrupting the coral formations in ways that appeared accidental but were obviously deliberate when viewed in sequence. The aquarium's administration took the incident extremely seriously because it involved deliberate destruction of ongoing research that had implications for marine conservation funding and scientific publications, and they launched a formal disciplinary investigation that could result in immediate termination and potential legal consequences for interfering with federally funded research projects. When I was called to testify about what I had observed during the diving session, I provided an honest account of the events despite the personal history I shared with Sage, supporting Nina's version of events and confirming that the coral disturbance patterns visible in the footage were inconsistent with normal diving activities or accidental contact. Sage's attempts to explain her actions as unintentional mistakes were contradicted by the security evidence, and her credibility was further damaged when other team members reported the pattern of increasingly inappropriate behavior they had observed over the previous months. The formal disciplinary hearing was scheduled for the following week, and I learned from our supervisor that the initial recommendation was immediate termination with a notation on Sage's employment record that would effectively end her career in marine conservation photography within the Pacific Northwest research community. The Seattle Marine Biology Network was relatively small and tight-knit, with researchers regularly collaborating across institutions, and news of someone deliberately sabotaging scientific research would travel quickly through professional channels and academic conferences. I found myself in the unexpected position of advocating for a less severe consequence, not because I excused Sage's behavior or wanted to minimize the serious impact of her actions on Nina's research, but because I believed she needed professional help and a chance to rebuild her career away from the toxic dynamics she had created at our facility. During my meeting with the disciplinary committee, I recommended that they consider offering Sage a transfer opportunity to the Vancouver Aquarium's research program, which I knew had an opening for a marine conservation photographer and would provide the geographic distance necessary for her to start fresh without the constant reminders of her mistakes. I explained that while her actions were inexcusable and had caused real damage to important research, termination would likely result in her leaving the field entirely, whereas a transfer with appropriate counseling requirements might allow her to learn from this experience and contribute meaningfully to marine conservation in a different environment. The committee was initially skeptical of my recommendation, particularly given my personal involvement in the situation, but they ultimately agreed to present the transfer option as an alternative to termination, contingent on Sage's acceptance of professional counseling and a formal written apology to Nina and the research team. During Sage's final weeks at the Seattle Aquarium, I observed her from a distance as she completed the mandatory transition procedures and prepared for her move to Vancouver, and I could see that the professional consequences had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about her behavior and motivations. She spent considerable time watching Nina and me work together on our joint projects, and I noticed her paying particular attention to how Nina contributed actively to our collaborative efforts rather than simply expecting attention and accommodation from her romantic partner. Nina never demanded that I prioritize her needs over my professional responsibilities, never manipulated situations to monopolize my time, and never treated our relationship as a competition with my other colleagues for resources and attention. Instead, she brought her own expertise and enthusiasm to our shared interests, contributing technical knowledge about kelp forest ecosystems that complemented my understanding of invertebrate behavior patterns, and she consistently supported my career development goals even when they required time commitments that reduced our personal time together. I realized that Sage was probably recognizing the contrast between her own behavior and Nina's approach to relationships, seeing how a healthy partnership involved mutual support and genuine interest in each other's success rather than the possessive territorialism and emotional manipulation that had characterized her recent actions. The transfer arrangements included a requirement that Sage participate in professional development counseling focused on workplace relationships and boundary management, and she would be starting her position in Vancouver with a clear understanding that any similar incidents would result in immediate termination without the option of further transfers. During one of her final days at the facility, I encountered Sage near the main entrance as she was carrying boxes of her personal belongings to her car, and she surprised me by expressing genuine gratitude for my recommendation that had ultimately saved her career in marine conservation photography. She acknowledged that her behavior toward Nina had been inappropriate and unprofessional, that she had allowed her personal feelings to compromise her judgment in ways that damaged important research, and that she needed time and distance to understand why she had made such destructive choices when faced with rejection and romantic disappointment. I told her honestly that I hoped the fresh start in Vancouver would help her rediscover the passion for marine conservation that had originally drawn her to this field, and that I believed she could rebuild her reputation through dedicated work and professional growth if she committed to learning from these mistakes. 6 months after her transfer, I received a professional email from Sage through the Interinstitutional Research Network, thanking me again for advocating for the Vancouver opportunity and updating me on her progress with the new marine conservation photography program that was documenting orca whale population recovery in British Columbia waters. 2 years later, I found myself face-to-face with Sage again during the annual Pacific Northwest Marine Biology Conference held at the University of Washington, where researchers from across the region gathered to present their latest findings and collaborate on conservation initiatives that required multi-institutional cooperation. I was attending with Nina, who was now my fiancée and had been invited to present her groundbreaking research on kelp forest restoration techniques that had been successfully implemented at several sites throughout Puget Sound following the recovery of her original documentation project. We had gotten engaged 6 months earlier during a diving expedition to explore deepwater coral formations near the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, and our relationship had evolved into the kind of partnership where we supported each other's professional goals while building a shared future based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. Sage was presenting her work documenting orca whale behavioral patterns and their relationship to salmon population recovery in the waters around Vancouver Island, research that had earned recognition from the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans and was being featured in several prominent marine conservation publications. During the panel discussion on innovative approaches to marine wildlife photography, I listened as she spoke professionally and confidently about her methodology for capturing underwater footage of whale feeding behaviors without disturbing their natural patterns, demonstrating technical expertise that had clearly advanced significantly during her time in Vancouver. When the question and answer session opened, Sage publicly acknowledged my early mentorship in her career development, crediting the technical knowledge about marine invertebrate behavior that I had shared during her time at the Seattle Aquarium with helping her understand the complex ecosystem relationships that now informed her whale photography work. Her acknowledgement was appropriate and professional, recognizing our shared work history while maintaining clear boundaries that respected my relationship with Nina and avoided any reference to the personal complications that had led to her transfer. After the panel concluded, Sage approached Nina and me during the networking reception, congratulating us on our engagement and expressing genuine happiness about Nina's success in rebuilding her coral restoration documentation project after the setback she had experienced. The conversation was brief but cordial, with Sage sharing that she was in a serious relationship with Marcus, a fellow conservation photographer who specialized in documenting climate change impacts on Arctic marine ecosystems, and that they were collaborating on a joint project to create educational materials about whale conservation for Canadian schools. I could see that the confident, entitled woman who had once expected special treatment and romantic attention had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely comfortable with her own accomplishments and capable of celebrating other people's success without resentment or competitive comparison. During our private conversation near the conference registration area, Caleb expressed genuine happiness about her professional success in Vancouver and her relationship with Marcus, acknowledging that the transfer had clearly provided the fresh start and perspective she needed to rebuild both her career and her approach to personal relationships. I told her honestly that I was impressed by the quality of research she had presented and that her whale photography work represented exactly the kind of innovative conservation documentation that could make a real difference in public awareness and policy development. Sage responded that the experience of losing her job and nearly destroying her career had forced her to confront some difficult truths about her behavior and motivations, particularly her tendency to treat relationships as competitions for attention and resources rather than opportunities for mutual support and growth. She explained that therapy had helped her understand that her original rejection of my romantic interest hadn't been about protecting our professional relationship, as she had claimed, but about wanting to keep me as an emotional safety net while she explored other options that seemed more exciting or advantageous. The realization that she had been using our friendship as a form of insurance policy while pursuing what she thought were better opportunities had been painful but necessary for her personal development, and she credited the distance provided by the Vancouver transfer with allowing her to develop healthier patterns in her relationship with Marcus. She told me that real friendship and real love wasn't about being someone's priority or special exception to normal boundaries, but about supporting each other's happiness and success even when it didn't center around your own needs or preferences. Our conversation reinforced my understanding that treating her exactly like the friend she had claimed to want had been the appropriate response to her original rejection, and that her inability to accept friendship without the special attention and romantic undertones revealed her own emotional immaturity rather than any failing on my part to maintain appropriate boundaries.